Welcome to Slaughterhouse Stories. I hope you enjoy the stories I have for you tonight. Hello to all you things that go bump in the night. Hello to all you humans as well. Welcome to the show that brings you creepypastas, short scary stories, and dark horror-themed poetry from all across the world. This is the Slaughterhouse Stories Podcast, episode 34, Bride Doll. I'm your host and narrator, Ghost Train, telling you to lock your doors, get under your blanket, and keep the lights on. You can follow the show on Twitter at iced_demon or on Instagram at slaughter_house_stories and discuss all things spooky with me. Also, you can write in and have your email read on the show. Email slaughterhousestoriespodcast@gmail.com with creepypasta requests, stories you've written, or your own real-life paranormal encounters. Before we get to tonight's first story, I'd like to ask you a favor. If you're enjoying the show, please head over and leave a review through iTunes and help spread the word to your friends, family, the porcelain doll watching you sleep, whomever. Tell them, be a listener, not a victim. Now, let's get spooky. To start us off tonight is a story by Dazerbout about a man who is terrified of thunder. Not of the brilliant, amazing flash of light before it, just a loud crash and banging of the superheated air that follows. And it's that fear of thunder that wakens him on what will turn out to be the scariest and most life-changing night of his life. Hopefully the thunder doesn't bring you the same level of fear, and you can try to relax and enjoy. It's just thunder. I've always been afraid of thunder, ever since I was a child. It's a bit strange, considering I've never really been afraid of lightning, only the thunder that followed. Maybe it's the noise, or the sudden vibrations, but something about it just chills me to the bone. Sorry to ramble on, but it does have something to do with my story. My story begins in the middle of the woods. You see, I used to be what the civilized refer to as a hermit. I used to live in a log cabin, out in the woods. You'd probably think it had something to do with the beauty of nature, but really, I was just tired of all the hustle and bustle of the big city. Of course, I no longer live in said cabin, but we'll get to that soon enough. It was a dark and stormy night. A bit cliche, I know. I had drifted off to sleep in my lounge chair, a half-filled glass of red wine in my left hand. Suddenly, I awoke to what sounded like a loud crash. Assuming someone might have broken into my house, I grabbed the closest object I could find, which just happened to be a fire poker. I checked each room carefully, and sighed with relief that no one had really broken in. I then turned my attention to the dark red stain spread across the crotch of my pants and all over my linen rug. I was about to go and change when suddenly, another loud crash rang out. Startled, I fell back into my chair, gasping as if I had run out of oxygen. I quickly jumped back onto my feet and began to pace. Another loud crash rang out, followed by the frail log cabin shaking. I was about to head for my bedroom to cower beneath my covers, when suddenly, as if out of nowhere, another crash could be heard. However, the sound had come from my attic. I stood in fear of what was to come. I grabbed my hunting rifle and headed for the hatch to the attic. As I stood below, all that could be heard was silence. In my mind, I decided there was most likely a rodent of some kind messing around up there. And so, I slowly put down my gun and headed to my bedroom. I tried to fall asleep, but all I could think about was the looming storm above and that noise. I was about to finally drift off to sleep when suddenly, a noise could be heard coming from down the hall. It was so quiet, it could have been anything. However, my mind refused to dismiss this. I listened for a good 5 minutes, but alas, all that could be heard was silence. By then I was afraid, so I stood up and went to lock my bedroom door. What came next nearly gave me a heart attack. I was standing before the door, ready to lock it, when it creaked open slightly. I jumped backwards onto my bed, hyperventilating, and almost as if on cue, another crash of thunder could be heard. I looked around my room, too mortified to stand up. Sadly, there were no weapons to be found. I had left my only gun out in the hallway. I quickly stood up and rushed to close the door. But for some reason, no matter how hard I pushed, the door just wouldn't close. That's when I saw it. A dull gray eye could be seen through the crack of the open door, staring back at me. I pushed one last time, and reluctantly, the door slammed shut. Thunder was the least of my worries. I thought of where I could possibly go. Even if I did climb out of the window, I still lived in the midst of a dense woods. My thoughts were cut short when I heard a slow but rhythmic banging coming from my door. I decided to take my chances. I rushed over to the window and propped it open with an umbrella my mother had given me as a child. Despite my rather large body, I somehow managed to fit through my window quite nicely. After climbing through the window, I fell face first into mud, but somehow I didn't seem to care. All that mattered was getting out of the woods. I sprung onto my feet, running off into the distance. As I ran, I occasionally glanced back to see if that thing was following me. However, that all changed when I began to hear a swift, rhythmic pounding on the ground behind me. I picked up my pace, sprinting as if I were running a marathon. Thunder rang out throughout the woods once more, and I jumped, falling face first into a tree. I knew I was doomed. I lay there in a daze, listening as the pounding grew closer. Ready to face death, I turned around only to see nothing. There was nothing there, except seemingly endless rows of trees. After that, I moved out of the woods and back into my old apartment. I never did return to that cabin. I had my friends collect my stuff from the cabin, and from what I was told, there was nothing inside that could be considered unusual or out of the ordinary. I remember seeing the eye, but was there really anything pursuing me in the woods that night? I often find myself thinking about that night and analyzing every critical detail, and yet I always end up with nothing. What was that thing? And what did it want from me? In the end, fears have the ability to mess with your mind, so maybe, just maybe, it was just the thunder. Perhaps you're right, human. Perhaps it was just thunder. Your mind playing tricks on you in the most realist ways possible. The banging, the door, the footsteps pounding behind you. But deep down you know, we all know, your mind didn't make up that gray eye or the struggle at the door. But don't worry, I'm sure you're safe now. I'm sure. But while we wait for the next thunderstorm to roll through, let's begin the next story. This one, by Nidu the Horror, about a man named Connor, aboard a space station as it hurtles through space towards the next galaxy. Connor wakes up to find bodies laid out all over the ship. The Shadow did this, and was now looking for Connor. At least, Connor thinks the Shadow is stalking him. Will he survive? Did any of the crew? Will they make it to the next galaxy? Stay right where you're at, and let's find out as you listen to Dementia. The light rained on Connor as he stared at the blinking orb. "Welcome home, Connor," the orb would always say. "There's something special about you, and we need you." Then the demonic voice would always jump in. "End it! End it all!" It would scream, and his shadow, would outstretch its hands and grab him. And that's when he'd always wake up. He gasped, the dream still conflicting him. He shook his head. The four mercenaries, isn't that what they were called? They were playing an old song. The song was made around 600 years ago? He tried to remember the date. June 25th, 2493. Yes, that was it. June 25th, 2943. He was on board the expedition to the next galaxy. The Red Flower, they called it, still far from view. The space station was huge and housed more than 50 people. More space than needed, but it didn't matter. He noticed now that his head was on the control panel. It was set to autopilot. Thank God. For a second, he thought he'd jump drive them somewhere. He heaved himself up and turned around, and noticed Shane laying dead. His eyes stared in horror as he saw the huge gash in Shane's stomach, a knife mark. He grabbed his M23 Jacker, a pistol, and searched the rest of the ship, and saw the other bodies. The stomach of a pregnant woman was ripped open, and her guts were on the floor next to her. Connor vomited, the stench in sight unbearable. He wiped his chin with his sleeve and got up, and heard something walk up behind him. He turned around, hoping to see a survivor, but instead it was the Shadow. Its arms were outstretched. It walked towards him. Connor backed up and fired, the plasma round soaking the Shadow, but it continued its deadly walk. He faltered as he reloaded, dropping the new clip. He quickly picked it up, but the Shadow was right in front of him. Adrenaline pumping, he quickly set the clip in and fell back onto his spine and shot. The round hit the Shadow's face, and it fell, hopefully dead, onto the ground, and something stirred in his mind. Voices, but not the voices from the dream. His vision blurred, and he saw Shane and another person, the woman. "Let's kill this crazy bastard," Shane declared. And then the door behind him opened, and was that the Shadow? Connor's vision reverted to normal, but a sick feeling remained in his stomach. He heard crying in whispers that seemed to carry through the halls. Unexplainable crying in whispers. Connor stayed put until he heard them stop, and stood back up shakily. The Shadow had been real, had killed his friend and the woman. No, the Shadow's only part of his dreams, right? Either way, it's dead now, he thought, turning his head to the Shadow's body. Where was it? The body was gone, he realized. It must have been his imagination, but it seemed so real. He shook his head and continued walking into the snack bay. Blood covered the walls, and a body, whose head wasn't where it should have been, was propped up against the wall. The same knife gash in the body. His vision blurred once again. The new vision he saw was the man that was propped against the wall. His face was covered in blood. "Please," he choked. Don't. His vision returned to normal, but he could still hear the scream. He stared at the body, and he blacked out. The dream replayed, except it was different. The orb was still blinking in all its glory. "Connor, I must show you something," it said, the voice echoing through the empty darkness that seemed to swirl them. Then everything went colorful. It was him, the knife in his hand. The vision with Shane and the woman reverted, except the Shadow was replaced by him. It was him. He saw himself slice Shane's stomach, and him tearing at the woman's guts and her child. He couldn't believe it. His vision returned to the orb. The end is inevitable, and soon. Then the demonic voice came. "End it all!" And the Shadow placed its hand over his eyes. Shane was hunched over and limping towards the sound of the whimpering. He gripped his gash and drew his knife. It was payback time. He went around the corner and saw him, the rat bastard Connor, standing there. "And to think you were my friend." Connor seemed to snap out of whatever trance he was in. He turned around. "Wait, don't..." Shane didn't hesitate, releasing the knife, and it flew into Connor's forehead. Connor stumbled back a few feet and landed on his back with a satisfying thump. Shane laughed and buckled to his knees. His vision started to swell, until all he saw was white. Well, Connor, if only you had done a better job of making sure that the dead were actually dead. Now it's you instead, and Shane is the one who gets to finish off the flesh bags and keep the ball of light all to himself. Poor Connor. From one science fiction story to another, it is time for this week's recommendation. I have yet another book for you listeners, and this one is a classic. It's famous, popular. It's inspired countless others to write their own stories. Movies, books, plays, TV shows, etc. have been made about this story or the character within. My recommendation is Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This book is amazing and helped start the sci-fi genre and influenced so many other horror writers. Just in case you've somehow never heard of it, young scientist Victor Frankenstein, grief-stricken over the death of his mother, sets out in a series of laboratory experiments, testing the ability to create life from non-living matter. Soon, his experiments progress further until he creates a humanoid creature 8 feet tall. But as Frankenstein soon discovers, a successful experiment does not always equal a positive outcome. A book that could both scare you and make you question your perception on what really makes a monster a monster. So go to wherever you get books and pick up this all-time classic. Now that I've given you this week's recommendation, let's take a trip down to open mic night at Beelze Pub. Welcome, fiends, to open mic night at Beelze Pub, where we invite you to sit right here and go into the more poetic side of fear. Poems of murder, creatures, and ghosts. All the things that scare you the most. Tonight at the pub, we start with a poem by William Blake about a man and his repressed feelings and what that repression leads to, and finish with a poem about a man named Joseph who spent his life ignoring the paranormal and how he learns the hard way just how real it is. Take a trip with rhymes and verse and enjoy A Poison Tree and What a Shame. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not, my wrath did grow. And I watered it down in fears, night and morning with all my tears. And I sunned it with smiles, and with soft, deceitful wiles. And it grew both day and night, till it bore an apple bright. And my foe beheld it shine, and he knew that it was mine. And into my garden stole, when the night had veiled the pole. In the morning glad I see, my foe outstretched, beneath the tree. We go through life, never paying attention to details. What a shame. We never look around corners or behind mirrors. What a shame. Unaware that there are others out there. What a shame. We are nothing but prey to them. What a shame. Joseph never believed in the paranormal. What a shame. He only saw what he believed he saw. What a shame. Only scoffed at horror movies and scary stories. What a shame. He walked through his life looking only forward. What a shame. Didn't bother looking behind him. What a shame. The pain in the back of his head surprised him. What a shame. He turned around as the claws dug in. What a shame. Even with blood clouding his vision, he looked for his assailant. What a shame. And on the ground, his shadow showed a wide grin. What a shame. Well, you see what repressing your feelings can get. Now a murderer, but at least your tree has a new decoration. And Joseph learned much too late that the spooky world is out there and has been following him his whole life. Nicely done, Shadow. Nicely done. Now it's time we left the pub for the night and got ready for some tiny porcelain terror. Let's go to the dollhouse. This month's trip to the dollhouse brings us a story by Shinigami Eyes about a little girl who goes to her friend's house, ready to have a sleepover and a night of pizza and boy bands. What she finds when she goes there really creeps her out. And what she finds later that night terrifies her. Hold your haunted doll close and enjoy Bride Doll. I remember when I was just a kid, about maybe 11 or so. I was staying in a friend's house. I spent the night there, and I remember her grandmom, who she lived with, due to her parents being irresponsible druggies, collected porcelain dolls. I didn't used to have a problem with dolls. Sure, I thought they were a little creepy, but I could easily overlook that and deal with it, like I could with a lot of other things. But one doll freaked me out particularly badly. The doll had to be 4 feet tall. It had long, luxurious-looking blonde curls down to the center of its back. It was clad in a lacy, expensive-looking bride's dress, and delicate-looking silky shoes, and fancy jewelry. But that's not what scared me. Her arms were outstretched, and her blue eyes were wide open, as if in fright. Her painted lips were also agape, as if they were frozen in a muted scream. I remember staring at it for a while, when I went to greet her grandmother, meeting her for the first time. I don't think she noticed, but my friend did. Yeah, I always thought that one was sort of spooky. Come on, let's go. You got the new Backstreet Boys CD, right? We should go listen to it. I haven't heard it yet. I just nodded in agreement, not wanting to be in the same room as that doll anymore. We did typical preteen girl things. We watched Spice World and listened to some pop CDs, poorly singing along with them. All thoughts of that creepy doll left my mind. Her grandma ordered pizza, and we ate and talked about what members of what boy bands we thought were cute. Or if we were a Spice Girl, which one would we be? It was always silly stuff like that when I was that age. We got around to telling scary stories after we turned the lights off. I was nowhere close to unnerved, but my friend fell asleep first. She was always quick to doze off. I sat up and stared at the static that she left on the television. She always needed some white noise to sleep, but frankly the static bothered me. It always did, but I left the TV on. It was her house after all. I can't say I slept well. I wasn't disturbed by nightmares. I just couldn't sleep. I think part of it was the occasional creaking on the floor. It was an old house though, so I just dismissed it as that. Then, for the last damn time, I woke up. It was 3 a.m, and I had to go to the bathroom. So I tossed and turned and kind of hoped I could just hold it, or at least stay warm for a little longer. But eventually, I gave in and got out of bed, placing my bare feet on the floor. At least it was carpeted. I quietly opened the door, so I wouldn't wake my resting friend. I then stepped out onto the tile in the hallway. I tensed up for 2 reasons. First, the tile was freezing cold, and the other reason, I saw that damn doll, her wide, lifeless, glassy eyes staring, her arms outstretched, and her dainty fingers reaching towards me, and her lips still parted in that soundless scream. It was a wonder I didn't wet my pants. Screw this, I thought, turning back around to go back into my friend's room. Stephanie! I shook her, and she stared at me with a blank look of annoyance. It kind of helped to wake her up. She was always bigger and stronger than me, and I never had trouble admitting that. What? She sat up. The doll, I murmured. What? Did you have a bad dream? No, it's in the hallway. What? That's not funny. Did you move it? No, I don't want to touch that friggin' thing. She chuckled at my reaction. But really, I'm serious. Come check if you don't believe me. Your grandma's room is on another floor, so we can just put it somewhere else. She nodded at me. When I opened the door, Stephanie stared at me like I was crazy. She could tell from the look on my face, even in the dim light of the static television, that I was being completely serious when I said I didn't touch it. Was it closer than it was a few minutes ago, or was it just my imagination? Well, here's the guest room my dad stays in when he visits. It was just a few feet away from the doll. I nodded and opened the door. It was a rather barren room. All that was in it was a bed, a lamp, and a nightstand. I guess we can put it in here until later. We moved the doll together. I hated touching it. It was cold to the touch, how I'd imagine a dead body to feel. We were careful not to damage it. It had cost a ton of money, and I didn't want to be blamed for something so expensive breaking, especially since that would mean I'd never get to visit my friend again. We both stared at the doll once we put it in the room. I'm pretty sure we were both officially freaked out. We looked at each other for a moment and slammed the door and hurried back to her room. We didn't go back to sleep that night. We stayed up flipping through channels on the TV. She had cable. I didn't when I was that age. When her grandma finally woke up, she came to Stephanie's room. "Have you girls seen my doll?" She looked really confused, meaning she wasn't the one who moved it. "Yes, ma'am," I said quietly. I try to be respectful whenever talking to adults. "Where is it?" "We put it in the guest room," Stephanie answered. "Why is it in there?" Then I responded, "Well, it was in the hallway." Stephanie nodded in agreement. She stared at us both like we were nuts. "Okay, girls, whatever you say." She chuckled as if to say, crazy kids and their stories. That morning we had breakfast, and Stephanie's grandpa came down to carry the doll back upstairs. I'm hoping he's the one who moved it in the hallway in the first place, because if not, there's no way I can explain what happened. A simple prank? Nah. More like a doll that wanted to join the sleepover. Or, kill someone. Either way, it would have been a fun night. But no, the little girl just had to put her in her room all alone. Such cruelty to an innocent doll. What a shame. Next time, for sure though. Now I believe that's enough scares for this week. I hope you will join me again next week for more stories that are sure to keep you afraid during the day and awake at night. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the stories that I had for you tonight. And until next time.
Stay spooky.